What if I told you there's an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay where some of the most dangerous criminals in America were locked away? And no one, I repeat, no one was ever supposed to escape? That's Alcatraz, a place hidden in mystery, fear, and legend. Alcatraz started as a military fortress in the 1850s, then turned into a federal prison in 1934. It was home to some of the most famous names like Al Capone and Machine Gun Kelly. The prison was designed so that no one could escape from here, surrounded by icy waters and strong currents. But stories of some escapes are still there in history. So, was Alcatraz really impossible to escape, or did some prisoners actually make it out alive? Keep watching because we are going to tell you everything here in this video. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon. From fortress to federal penitentiary, Alcatraz wasn't always the scary rock that everyone thinks it is. This island had already changed names several times before Al Capone came along and tried to run things. It was first a military post, then a prison for soldiers, and finally the infamous federal pen. You can learn a lot about how America was changing, especially in the late 1800s and early 1900s, by looking at how it changed over time. The name itself has been around for a long time. In 1775, Spanish explorer Juan Manuel de Ayala sailed around the bay and named it La Isla de los Alcatrazes, which means the Island of the Pelicans. That makes sense because the place is empty, rocky, and full of seabirds. That doesn't sound like a paradise, does it? And nature kind of made it a prison before any walls were built. Think about it. The water is freezing cold, the currents are so strong that they pull you out into the Pacific, and the fog is so thick that you can barely see your hand in front of you. Not exactly easy to get away? Go ahead to 1850. President Millard Fillmore, who most people forget was president, looked at this rocky island and said, yes, we're keeping that. He signed a paper that said Alcatraz and a lot of other land in the Bay Area would be federal property. Why? Because the gold rush was going on in California. The U.S. needed defenses in case a foreign navy got any ideas because San Francisco went from a sleepy little town to a booming city almost overnight. That's when work began on a fortress. Alcatraz had the first lighthouse on the Pacific coast by 1854. That shows how important they thought this little rock was. Alcatraz was right in the middle of the bay, so ships needed help getting through the water safely. So at first it was a mix of a fortress, a lighthouse, and a military base. The military prison years. What is the role of the prison? Let's talk about that. Captain Joseph Stewart and Company H of the 3rd U.S. Artillery came to town in 1859. There are 86 men, and they brought the first prisoners with them. Where did they put them? The guardhouse's basement. Not at all fancy. It's dark, wet, and there isn't much of a system. You're going down there because you messed up in the army. The Civil War came next. This is interesting. The fortress was built to keep foreign navies out, but its most important job turned out to be protecting America during its own Civil War. The Union needed a strong, safe base on the West Coast. Alcatraz was just right. For instance, when the Union was worried that Confederate supporters might steal supplies, they put 10,000 rifles on the island, safe and out of reach. The list of prisoners grew too. You had Confederate pirates and Union soldiers who had broken the law in the same jail. People who were accused of treason also got thrown in. If you were a troublemaker on the West Coast during the Civil War, there was a good chance you would be sent to the Rock. There weren't too many people there back then. In the early 1860s, there were about 15 prisoners on average. It was up to 49 by the end of the war. It doesn't sound like much compared to later days, but it was hard to keep track of because of the turnover and the mix of people, soldiers, sailors, and civilians. And then there was the bad part of its past. Native Americans were also kept there. 19 Hopi men from Arizona were taken to Alcatraz in 1895. What did they do wrong? Not going along with government programs that tried to erase native traditions like land allotment and boarding schools. Because they didn't back down, the government put them on this cold rock in San Francisco Bay. That one act kind of hints at what would happen decades later when native activists took back the island in 1969. That's a strange way for history to go back. Building America's super prison. Then, in 1898, the Spanish-American War happened and Alcatraz got hit hard. The number of prisoners went from a few dozen to more than 450. Think about going from running a small jail to running hundreds of them. The Army had to build new prisons because they had no other choice. They built a upper prison on the parade ground by 1900. In 1907, Alcatraz got its official name, the Pacific Branch U.S. Military Prison. That was basically the army saying, okay, fine, this isn't just a fort anymore. It's a prison. At the same time, military technology was getting better, and coastal fortresses were starting to look old. Big guns on islands weren't going to be enough to fight modern ships. The army thought, instead of tearing Alcatraz down, let's make the prison part of it even better. That's when they really went for it. They began building the huge concrete cell house in 1909 with Major Reuben Turner in charge. You can still see it today on a tour. When it was finished in 1912, it was the biggest concrete building in the world. There are 600 cells, each with its own toilet and power. We might think that's simple now, but back then it was very new. They had to tear down most of the old Citadel barracks to make room for it, except for the basement level. People talked about the dungeons under the prison, which is how that basement became part of Alcatraz's legend. It was mostly just basement space, but as the Rock's reputation grew, those dark rooms underground inspired all kinds of scary stories. America was dealing with a new type of criminal in the 1920s and 1930s. Think of gangsters, bank robbers with machine guns, and the Prohibition era. People were escaping from normal prisons all the time, and bribery? It was all over the place. Guards were paid off, and prisoners lived like kings if they had the money. That's when Alcatraz came into play. Homer Cummings, the Attorney General, and Sanford Bates, the head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, agreed that the country needed something stronger. Not just any prison, but the prison. Their plan was simple. Get all the worst troublemakers, the ones who could get away, and the ones that other prisons couldn't handle, and put them all on this one rock. No rehab, no second chances. Just make sure they stay locked up. In October 1933, the federal government officially took over from the army. They spent $260,000 on improvements, which was a lot of money back then. They put in alarm systems, advanced locks, and metal detectors that were not available in other prisons. Training for guards was very tough. Forget about getting better. It was all about discipline and control. The idea behind modern supermax prisons is maximum security, minimum privilege. Alcatraz was the first of its kind. The first federal prisoners, August 11th, 1934. That's when Alcatraz's time as a federal prison really starts. The first group of 137 prisoners came from Leavenworth, Kansas. And this wasn't just a simple transfer. The security was too much. Prisoners were handcuffed, guards were heavily armed, and even FBI agents were taking them by train and boat. They weren't taking any chances. Judges didn't send people directly to the Rock. Instead, it was where the Bureau of Prisons sent the most difficult cases from other places. People who made trouble in Leavenworth or Atlanta ended up here. How long do people usually stay? 5 years or so, long enough to break them before sending them back to a regular prison. Warden James Johnston was the first staff member. He would run the place with an iron grip for 14 years. The man was tough, he was strict, serious, and not easily fooled. Alcatraz worked like a machine under him. Life in there was bad. Inmates were only guaranteed 4 rights: food, clothes, a place to live, and medical care. You had to earn everything else like visits, fun, and reading. Did you mess up? You would be put in solitary confinement and have to live on bread and water. It was planned discipline. Let's talk about the main prisoner now. Al Capone is the one that everyone remembers. Capone's gangster empire was already falling apart when he was sent to Alcatraz in August 1934. He was in jail for not paying his taxes, but before that, he had a good life. He bribed guards at Atlanta Federal and had nice furniture and even a radio in his cell. He was pretty much running a small hotel. But what about Alcatraz? A whole different game. Warden Johnston wasn't going to let it happen. Capone tried to act like a leader and speak for other inmates like he used to. Johnston really put him down. He gave him his number and told him to get in line like everyone else. Capone didn't like it. He fought, got put in solitary confinement, and even got stabbed in the barber area with scissors once. The Rock took away all of his power. Capone finally said it. It looks like Alcatraz has got me licked. That's saying a lot, coming from a man who used to be in charge of Chicago. His health was getting worse because of syphilis by the end of the 1930s. He was moved, finished his time, and died not long after that, a shadow of the man he used to be. The toughest prisoners arrive. Sure, Capone got all the press, but he wasn't the only famous person behind those cold steel bars. The Rock had a whole group of bad guys. For example, George Machine Gun Kelly. You'd think that someone with a name like that would be a crazy person who loves to shoot things, right? The truth is that by the time he got to Alcatraz, he was sort of tame. He was famous for kidnapping oil tycoon Charles Urschel in 1933, which got him a life sentence. But on the Rock, he kept his head down. He even ended up being an altar boy at Mass in prison. Picture this. Machine Gun Kelly is kneeling in church and helping with communion. It's kind of funny. Then there's Robert Stroud, who is better known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. And here's the funny part. He never really kept birds while he was in Alcatraz. He got the idea for Birdman from his time at Leavenworth, where he studied and bred canaries. He really did become an expert on bird diseases and even wrote books about them. But at Alcatraz, there were strict rules. No pets or birds. Instead, he spent his time reading and writing. In the movie Birdman of Alcatraz, Hollywood turned him into a tragic genius. But what really happened? He was still a threat. He had killed before and stayed unpredictable until the end. Then there's Alvin Creepy Karpis. To be honest, he might have been the most hardcore of them all. He was a member of the Barker Karpis gang, a group of bank robbers who scared people in the Midwest in the 1930s. Karpis spent the longest time in prison at Alcatraz, 26 years. He lived through almost the whole federal era of Alcatraz, from beginning to end. And what happened when he finally got out? He was sent back to Canada, so Alcatraz wasn't just a random prison. It was like America's criminals' all-star team. The Battle of Alcatraz, people said that the Rock was impossible to escape from, and for the most part that was right, but that didn't stop guys from trying. And in 1946, one attempt led to a full-blown war inside the prison. It all started with Bernard Coy, a bank robber who had lost everything. He had been watching the guards and memorizing their moves, waiting for the right moment. He even went on a diet to lose weight so he could fit through the bars of the gun gallery. That's some really good planning. Coy made his move on May 2nd, 1946. He greased himself up with axle grease, squeezed through, and made it to the gun gallery where the guns were kept. He and a few others, including Joseph Kretzer, Marvin Hubbard, and a young man named Clarence Carnes, took over part of the cell house and held 9 guards hostage. What was their big plan? Get away through the yard and get to the water. But this is where everything went wrong. They couldn't find the yard door key. William Miller, one of the guards, had hidden it, and without that key, their whole plan fell apart. They were stuck inside with a lot of weapons and no way out. Anger turned into violence. Kretzer shot Miller point blank because he was so angry that he was stuck. It was a mess from there. Gunfire broke out all over the prison. Guards outside fought back. It was like a siege for 2 days. The Marines were even called in. They threw grenades into the prison and fired mortars to try to get the prisoners to come out. Can you believe it? Grenades went off in a federal prison in the middle of San Francisco Bay. 3 prisoners, Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard, had died by the end. 2 guards were also killed, and more than a dozen were hurt. The Rock's reputation as escape-proof stayed strong, but it came at a high price. People started calling the event the Battle of Alcatraz, the Great Escape of 1962. But none of the escape attempts got as much attention from the public as the one in June 1962. This is the one that Hollywood made into a movie, and people are still arguing about what happened. 3 men, Frank Morris and his brothers John and Clarence Anglin. They weren't stupid criminals. They were smart, careful, and determined. They were also patient. Cell Block B had all of its cells lined up next to each other. There was an unguarded utility corridor behind their cells. The walls were made of old wet concrete, which made it easier to chip away at them. So every night during music hour, when the sound of accordions and radios drowned out the digging, they did it. They used anything they could find, like spoons, forks, and even a drill made from a stolen vacuum cleaner motor. They painted cardboard and made little grates to cover the holes so the guards wouldn't see them. And the fake ones? Brilliant. They used paper mache to make fake heads, painted them in skin tones, and then glued real human hair from the prison barbershop on top. At night, they put the heads in their beds so the guards would think they were asleep. Everything was set on the night of June 11th, 1962. They crawled through the holes into the utility corridor, climbed up a ventilation shaft, got onto the roof, slid down plumbing pipes, and made it to the beach. Are you waiting for them? A raft made it home out of more than 50 stolen raincoats that were sewn and glued together. They even made vests for life. Then, in the fog, they set out for the bay. Alan West was supposed to be the 4th guy, but he couldn't get out of his hole in time. He was stuck, left behind, and eventually told the police everything. The next morning, the guards did a roll call, poked the fake heads, and found out that the men were gone. Fear. Everyone, including the FBI, Coast Guard, and police, was called in. They looked in the bay, along the shore, and in the city. They found bits and pieces like a paddle, some personal items, and later what might have been part of the raft. But what about the men? Not found. The FBI officially closed the case in 1979, saying that the men probably drowned. The water in the bay is freezing, the currents are strong, and the distance is hard even for good swimmers. But here's the thing. There were never any bodies found. Over the years, there have been stories about them, like sightings in South America, a picture of two men in Brazil who looked a lot like the Anglin brothers, and even a claim that they lived quietly after escaping. Did they make it? No one knows for sure. And that's why this escape is so famous. So after everything you've heard, the fortress days, the gangster years, the battles, and the daring escapes, what do you think? Was Alcatraz really inescapable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next video.